All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the end of the world with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I am Stu, and today we are talking about Omar El Akkad's 2017 novel, American War. But American War, a very ominous title, shall we say. But before we get into that, we just wanted to keep on with our political actual end of the world beat.
Yeah, I think that this is becoming a recurring segment, I would guess, with the chaotic events unfolding at the speed they are, probably all the way through the election. So we might just start referring to it as the actual end of the actual world segment. So yeah, why don't you fill me in? Has anything happened this week that you might
no,
wanna-
nothing's happened. It's been completely dull. And okay, so last time we recorded, the Trump shooting had just happened. That seems like 100 years ago because
Yeah.
on Saturday, or no, it was on Sunday, our beloved
Mhm.
leader, Joe Biden, has bowed out of the presidential race and is ceding his support to...
On Twitter, right? Or was it Instagram?
It was
It
on
was like
Twitter, yeah. Very odd choice, given
no
the...
words, no speaking, which I guess he's still down with COVID.
Yeah, he's ill. Yeah, a little odd, right? And there were
It's
some
a little bit odd.
there were conspiracy theories that it was an intern had just pressed like
I
it's like,
love
all right,
that one.
Johnny, you're in charge of the... I don't know why I always choose the name Johnny.
Well, someone had mentioned that before, that if he's in such a state of disrepair, you could just tell him that he announced that he did.
And then he's like, "Oh,
withdraw.
I did.
And
Oh,
you'd be like,
of
okay.
course." Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so he's out, and the establishment is coalesced behind Harris faster than I had anticipated, and there
Yeah.
seems to be genuine momentum behind her. I'm seeing a lot of memes,
Yeah.
a lot of enthusiasm, and immediately people have pivoted to Donald Trump is too old to serve, which is good because that has been their main line of attack on Biden for 6 months, and now,
Right.
uh-oh.
Yeah, and in fact, there are Republicans, I think, who themselves are now trying to get in the way of the Harris nomination. And I think part of that is precisely that some of them truly think that this was a bait and switch precisely for these purposes. And I think obviously that's insane, but you can see the whole foundation of the Trump candidacy was based on like him just standing next to that guy,
Right.
and in all of his craziness, still looking more competent than the guy next to him. And now, it is hard to shift messaging, especially with this guy. It is hard to shift. It's at least a transition that they didn't want to deal with, whether
Right,
it's
and
ads,
Trump,
top down.
Trump was already having issues. He was calling Biden Obama at times. Remember that? There was a few slip-ups in speeches where he said, and Obama wants to do this and wants to do that. Yeah. And it's like, is this like a subtle suggestion that Obama's like the puppet master behind Biden? Right. Which is like manifestly not true.
I think the one thing that it's done, not that it wasn't already happening, but this brief attempt that I'll talk about in a second, I do think is also indicative of some underlying insecurity beneath the facade of sort of the certainty of a Trump victory from Republicans.
Yeah.
That they sought to use because when he got shot, he easily could have come out, to use a very bad example in this case, but he could have come out guns blazing, right?
Sure.
And instead there was this,
tried to imply that it was like a hit by Biden.
I mean, whatever he wanted to do, right? Like calling his people to stand up and take arms. I mean, he could have done anything. Who knows what he could have done, right?
Right.
And you can tell by the tactic, which was like, this is our only chance to increase the favorables of a man that, despite all of Biden's problems, Trump is not a good candidate. He's not a good candidate.
He's wildly unpopular. Yeah.
He's wildly unpopular. And so this was a moment, and like you said when we were talking about it just earlier, he couldn't even make it through the end of his speech trying to do this softer. He sounded hoarse. It was very strange. The whole delivery, it was like they just told him. Right. It's like how he would sound if his advisor was like, hey, you should try to sound nice over the next,
Yeah, so a couple days before Biden dropped out, there was the grand finale of the Republican National Convention, in which Trump did deliver an hour and a half long speech. I think it was the second longest speech ever, if not the longest.
I think quite clearly the worst convention speech ever delivered by some distance.
It was very boring. It was
Yeah.
so playing the hits. He did the Hannibal Lecter thing. He did it's like, and it was filled with unscripted asides and just utter lies. Like
Yeah.
he lied constantly.
Yeah.
Nothing he said virtually was true or verifiable.
Right. And after the debate, Trump had done a pretty good job by Trump standards of being quiet, and it sort of appeared as though they just knew if they could run out the clock, they would win.
Yeah.
And so what this has done with assuming it's Harris, but at least with Biden dropping out, is it's been the reset that they needed to get off of the facade of unity, right? And so right, even with Harris now, you're already getting Harris birthers. They're diving into
Yeah.
her sexual history, which is amazing. You got Republicans like diving into her sexual history. This guy has sexually assaulted multiple people, right? Like,
Yeah.
but like, and
well, they're attacking her for
top,
not having children as a new
right.
line.
So they're
I feel
going
like
back into this.
all
right?
of this is pretty gross, though, and I don't think it moves the needle in the middle at all, right? No one's going to be like.
I think that they, despite their current situation, which appears to be a pretty decent lead in battleground states, I think that they still realize that if Trump is going to win, it's always going to be a base election. At the end of the day, this man cannot get people.
Yeah.
He had the sliver of a chance because Biden couldn't finish sentences. And now that that's over, this is the next move, right? JD Vance works out well for that. Although we watched Vance today, he had that's flying around online that he said that he drinks Diet Mountain Dew and that Democrats would say that was racist.
They say, well, his point was that
conservative comedy, it's like, it's not a joke, and it also sounds like something that's too close to what these insane people would actually think to hit with anybody. They can't tell whether they're supposed to agree for real or laugh. The audience just kind of sits there, and it just peters out.
And he's like, haha, I love you guys, in this very odd
and
tone.
I think that now they're in trouble because, Vance was going to be able to get up in front of Harris and be like, how can you let the country have a guy who shouldn't serve, who isn't fit to serve? And now, say what you want about these guys, but if you're throwing up a Midwesterner to foil him, whether it's Shapiro or, Buttigieg, obviously Buttigieg politically a pretty heinous monster, but you have
it's
to
not going to
think
be him. He's not.
It's not, but I'm saying these guys are not, right? The card has shifted, the fighting card has shifted, and it doesn't work out well.
I think Bashir from Kentucky is the guy that matches up.
That's what I heard. Shapiro is. Also,
I don't like Shapiro.
I don't really like any of them.
Well, I don't like Bashir either, but I will say this for Bashir: he has not backed down when people have attacked him for pro LGBT stuff in a way that I think is instructive.
Yeah.
And he is from the same region as Vance, and has already started in TV appearances calling out some of the more heinous aspects of Vance's hillbilly elegy thesis.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good move in the context of the obnoxiousness of our politics to have a Midwestern type who is basically saying, you don't speak for us type thing to Vance.
Exactly.
This is actually not what the Midwest is. And that's going to play in Michigan. It's going to play in Minnesota. Those places will like that. But, to finish on the Harris thing, in this case, I don't really think they have a genuine option of an open convention. I think with or without Biden's endorsement, because you just need to deal with the people saying it's not democratic. You can't let the party define chaos all the way up until the convention. It can't work. And on top of that, more cynically, this is one of the boldest moves yet unavoidable. The only way the Democrats ever do something risky is when they have to. But it is part of their playbook. They do coalesce, right? I mean, we saw this in 2020, ironically, around Biden when they pushed Sanders to the side. And you're seeing a very similar thing right now, which is we're pushing Biden to the side. So we've got to have someone that we can put front and center, and everybody else just is okay.
Yeah,
that's fine.
and that seems to be happening. Now, to go back to the
I mean,
van,
she's raised hundreds of millions of dollars in a
yeah,
matter of
in a
two
day,
days.
in one day. Yeah. To
I
go
mean, she
back,
sucks too. I
I
mean,
mean,
it's.
you know, she's not
But
great.
I think she has a real
I
chance
think
to
she's a
win.
little bit better than Biden on some
I
level.
I mean, probably. I mean,
I mean, for
I
one thing,
look.
she's much younger, right? I mean,
What I think is that they didn't have a chance before and they have a chance now.
that's
That's
right.
basically the simplest way
They're
of
back in
looking
the
at it.
game.
And you can see it. I mean, I said to you, I texted you right after the announcement, and I said, my guess is that
I
Trump
got to,
says,
although I got to alert you this time that Biden had dropped
"Oh
out.
no, yes, that is true. You did break the news." But I said to you, right, very quickly, I thought Trump is going to paint her as an illegitimate candidate to get out of the
And you
debate.
were right,
And
because immediately the first line was, I'm not debating this person who. And
yes,
if he
right.
loses, you know he's going to claim this election's not legitimate because of the Harris Biden switch.
Oh, I
Like,
mean, it sets
I mean,
up.
he'll say it no matter what. I mean, there'll be
It
something.
sets up like this is the thing. It sets up even more profoundly the possibility for chaos after the election. I
Yeah,
mean, there's no way basically now, apart from like a clear Trump victory, where
which
this
we're all
thing.
praying for, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, yeah. And where does it go? And you have people who are like, we're always on the cusp of the civil war now, right? But just to like end this segment, to bring up that idea, it actually did come out
Right.
at the VP's event today. So the VP candidate, JD Vance, is at a rally today, and he's being introduced by George Lang, who's state senator at Ohio. And I just want to read what he says before he brings him up. Okay, he
Please.
says. Lang says Trump and Butler counties JD Vance are the last chance to save our country politically. I'm afraid if we lose this one, it's going to take a civil war to save the country, and it will be saved. It's the greatest experiment in the history of mankind, and if we come down to a civil war, I'm glad we got people like Schmitty and the bikers for Trump on our side.
Yeah, it's not good. Greatest
I mean,
experiment. It's kind of cliched. I mean, Kinsey experiment,
sure,
probably greatest experiment, right?
right, but like
Manhattan Project. Anyway, no, sorry.
these things are often played, and I think mostly correctly, as the height of the rhetoric that these people can
Yeah,
muster.
yeah. But now he's
Don't
just
tread
all
on
he's
me.
just mask off. Like it will need to
Right,
have a civil war.
right, and
Which is
like
like, bro, do you even like have you really thought about like what that would entail? Like
obviously not that much if he assumes that the scales will tip because the bikers for Trump
right.
are part of the war. Like these people have no idea, and similarly, I think people on the other side have no idea what may unfold here, the level of political violence you might see in a Trump defeat, especially if they all get convinced that she shouldn't even be allowed to be in the race, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, it's not good. I mean, it's
Yeah, it's not
it's
good.
really not good. We're looking at January 6th times 100, right? I mean,
Yeah, right, right.
and
We're,
it'll
we're looking
be
at vacation on November 5th is what we're looking
well, with that very optimistic and uplifting sort of introduction, shall we talk about this week's book? We're doing a
at.
novel
Yeah.
once again, a Canadian novel once again.
Hmm.
I think this brings our tally to one British novel, one American, and two Canadian. A subtle bias is creeping into the
Yes, well, I
podcast.
can't speak to that, of course.
No, of course not. And you didn't go to the same college as the other. Oh no, wait, you did. In
Oh, wait,
fact.
I did. Yes, yes. Queen's University, the pride of Queen's University.
Yeah, which apparently Queens is going bankrupt now, essentially. Like,
That doesn't surprise me.
it's-
You know how I know it was on the way down?
how?
They never got any money out of me. Not a cent.
Yeah, I mean, Yale hasn't gotten much out of me, but I'm also don't think they really are in
Yeah,
dire
it's a bit
straits
of a
per
different
se.
situation.
I
That's
think
right.
I
That's
think
right.
they're doing okay. I'll edit
But
out
the
the
book is American War,
American
and
War. It's
it's about a civil war.
and it's interesting because it came out in 2017, was
Hmm.
presumably written before Trump's election, and is
But
also,
during, one would assume, Trump's campaign, probably, it felt like it informed some of it.
I think so. So the basic idea here is it's set about about 50 years in the future from now.
Hmm.
I think it starts in 2074, and around 2073, 74, once again, states in the South have seceded. Now, this is a world
That
that,
old chestnut, huh?
yeah, it's back, and only this time it's slightly different because the contours of the country have dramatically shifted because of climate change, right?
Yeah.
So there's an eco element in this novel that's similar to Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, which we covered some months ago. And there's also a kind of there's a different polarity going on. Now, the author Omar El Akkad went to high school and college in Canada, but he's of Egyptian origin originally and grew up in Qatar. I can never say that correctly. And so clearly, the events that shaped his consciousness would be the two incursions in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. You know, the various American led interventions in the Middle East that have,
That's right,
as we know, brought nothing
to the graveyard of empires, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, exactly. And that he's sort of what he's doing with this novel is he's kind of imagining a future in which the polarity has been reversed, where it is in fact America that is engaged in this sort of internecine struggle between different sects, and the Bouazizi Empire, which is a kind of reunited but democratic caliphate stretching from Morocco to the Caspian Sea, is intervening in the struggle between the states and the United States.
Right. And that is an empire in the ascendancy.
Exactly. And China, which is mentioned a few times but doesn't really intervene directly, is the other world power. And both it's in the
I like that. He's 50 years later and they're still not quite getting their hands
well,
in
I
there.
think they're in there, but I think clearly his interest coming from that region is more on the idea of an empire of
and the migrant things like the migrant crisis is in reverse, so a lot of Europeans are
trying to
taking
escape
off.
into Africa and into
right.
the Middle East, right? Another thing is the geography of the United States has changed dramatically. Florida is basically underwater, except for a few mountain peaks.
R.I.P.
Yeah, gone too soon. And
DeSantis.
all the coastal, DeSantis is no more. All the coastal cities are basically abandoned, right? The capital has been relocated from Washington, D.C. to Columbus, Ohio.
Which is a great choice. You know, I worked on the road for this construction company for years.
Yeah.
And we would always go to Columbus. It is the hub of shipping in this country.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I believe it has one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Amazon shipping warehouse because of the way that it expands out. Its location is perfect, you know. So I thought that when I saw that, I was like, that's a cool choice. You know, he's not doing like it feels a little off kilter, but then when you actually look at the map he's drawn out, it actually like makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think this is not that uncommon a trope. Like, isn't in The Postman, I think the capital is in like somewhere in the Midwest too, right? It might even also be.
I mean, it's the general idea.
Or I think it's Detroit in Postman or something. Like,
Detroit Reborn.
Yeah, it's in Ann Arbor. Like, anyway, yeah. So the Civil War starts when there's a ban on fossil fuels, which is interesting because by the time that the novel is taking place, almost no one uses fossil fuels anymore. People in Texas and the South who've been mining oil from the Gulf or, you know, from the Texas oil fields want to keep doing it, but it's not that there's even a market for their fuel anymore. It's more that there's just a nostalgic attachment, right? They like want to keep using it because it's part of their culture, which I think is really interesting and really
I love that
and really accurate.
It feels plausible.
Like that would happen. Like,
well, I mean, you see it where they run campaigns on like AOC doesn't want you to be able to buy a hamburger.
Right, or like your gas, take my gas stove out of my cold dead hands.
That's right.
Where there's like no consideration given to the practical value of what you're doing. It's all just about this nostalgic attachment.
Or other options.
Yeah, like it might be much easier to use electric powered object, but that doesn't matter. It's not about that. It's about the statement. So
Yeah.
the areas that have seceded, are called the MAG because it's the main states are Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. Florida is no more. South Carolina originally was part of the secessionist movement, but that gets taken out quickly, as we'll discuss in a minute.
Mhm.
And Texas was also part of the rebellion, but was quickly conquered by a resurgent Mexico, who has reclaimed all of the former
Yeah.
Mexican territory in the Midwest and places going up into like Utah and stuff like that, which I kind of like just as a concept, right? Mexico's like,
Yeah.
actually, that's ours. You guys are busy
Yeah.
fighting each other, and we'll just swoop in and take all that. Um,
Also plausible.
yeah, I mean, who knows? It's also the case that many of the states in the South, places like Louisiana, which is where our characters are situated at the beginning of the novel, are nominally still part of the Union, but they're very much divided regions where people who go to work for the government are routinely killed by rebels who are sort of, forming these little cells amongst the sort of ostensibly union held areas, right? It's like
Yeah.
a kind of purple area, right? And South Carolina is neutralized relatively early on in the war because the government releases a plague. And it's not a plague that causes the Black Death or something like that.
It's called the slow.
The
Right?
slow because its effect is to render everyone in a region as kind of living zombies. I thought of that
Mhm.
movie
Sort of like
Awakenings.
television.
Yeah, it's everyone is hooked on TikTok in South
Yeah,
Carolina.
yeah.
Yeah, but remember that movie Awakenings where those people have, I think it's Oliver Sacks wrote the book, where there were these people who were afflicted by this sleeping sickness. I think
I haven't seen it.
it's caused by this tsetse fly, right, or something,
Okay.
where you get bit by this fly and then you're alive, you're conscious, but you can't move. You're essentially a living
Right, you're
zombie.
zombie-like, yeah.
Right. And the movie Awakenings, they develop a cure for it, and the people wake up and they're happy again, but it doesn't take. There's definitely a parallel in this
The
because
Fauci.
what's
It
that?
sounds a lot like Fauci, right? The
um,
vaccine.
maybe. But interestingly, one of the unintended consequences of this is government scientist. This guy Jerry Tusk, great name,
Great
is a
name.
scientist who's working in South Carolina, and like the whole state is like this. Once
Yeah.
this disease took
And it's
hold,
shut out from the rest
others
of the
right,
country.
everyone else dropped a quarantine around the whole state to keep the and apparently now we know from COVID this feels a little unrealistic, right? You're not just
Mhm.
gonna stop a disease entirely along state lines. Like
Yeah.
anyway, um,
I'll forgive it because it's pretty critical to creating the whole world of the story,
yeah,
you
and
know?
and this scientist does the awakenings thing. He comes up with something that he thinks is a cure. People wake up. They're like, "Oh my god,
Hmm.
you know, and these people are able to like eat. They're able to like move. They're even able to read." He says,
Right.
crucially.
They don't have to socially distance anymore.
But no. I mean, the people who are still afflicted with the slow, they can like you can hold a book and they can like read a book. They
Yeah,
just
yeah.
can't like pick up a gun and go shoot the Union
Sort of
Army.
like it's sort of like a more literary version of like long COVID, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit more debilitating than even long COVID,
Yes, right.
however. But it turns out this cure that he comes up with, everyone who gave it to dies like really suddenly, like a week after they woke up. And it turns out
Hell
that
of a cure, Bob.
this is actually an even more deadly disease called
Right. It's not, it's weird, right? Because it's not like medicine gone wrong. It does cure you from being afflicted by the slow.
but with a
But
consequence of you dying almost immediately
caveat,
thereafter.
you then die immediately. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
I like that exchange he makes there.
Right. So it's like you create a bug to fight a bug, but it turns out it does its job too well and also
That's right.
just kills you. This guy Jerry Tusk gets very dispirited by this and moves away to the Bouazizi Empire, right?
Mhm.
And he takes his samples with him. So we learn about this pretty early on in the novel, and it's very obvious at some point later that it's going to come back, and boy does it.
Yeah.
So there's the central states are these the mag states, and our main characters are the Chestnut family. the main figure of whom is a young girl who's 6 years old at the beginning of the story in 2074, Sarat Chestnut, right?
Mm.
She has a twin sister, fraternal twin, Dana, and a brother, Simon. And these three characters are the kind of nucleus of the story. They have a mother. His father is also Benjamin Chestnut, right? And he dies almost right away. He's one of these
Yeah.
people who lives in the South but volunteers to work for the North and gets killed in a suicide bombing, right?
Yep.
It's all over for him. And essentially, like, the mother, Martina, is distraught, doesn't know what to do. Their breadwinner is
Right.
dead. They
And then
have
fighting starts, right? Fighting starts,
Well,
and they
there's
say it's
rumor that
coming their
fighting
way.
is coming their way. They don't know what
Yeah.
to do. There are rebels coming across from Mississippi, and they end up going essentially to a refugee camp, right? It's the only place that she doesn't want to go. She doesn't want to give
Camp
up.
Patience.
Camp Patience, this is called.
Also great.
Perfect
Very
name.
American, very
Yeah.
American branding on a refugee camp.
Right. And Camp Patience is on the Mississippi-Tennessee border. I think it's nominally run by the Southern government. It's not entirely clear to me how this all works. There's the official Southern government, which is headquartered in Atlanta, and they're the ones who are like, no, we're like a real country. Here, we're issuing
Yeah.
dollars, we're doing diplomacy. But
Yeah, they have a currency.
but at the same time, the redbacks, I think they're called, like
Redbacks,
instead of the
yeah.
greenbacks,
Yeah.
they're at the same time, there's a group of Southern rebels who are kind of a terrorist group that are the ones that are infiltrating Union areas, setting off bombs, doing, all sorts of horrible things in order to further the war. Because, as you might expect, when actual fighting starts, like, the rest of the country has a lot more people and, munitions and things, and they
Right.
win. So they have to resort almost immediately to, like, guerrilla warfare.
Right, like the war is functionally won by the North, but the difference is like the negotiation of terms. These states are still seceded.
Yeah, they haven't
Right.
surrendered, and they
Yeah.
are getting military and monetary and provisional support from China and the Bouazizi Empire. So you have these great moments where these kids are like wearing shirts that have these weird letters on them that they can't quite read, which is presumably Arabic writing and things like that. And they're agents of these.
It's like the reverse of how like America sends like the losing
Dallas Mavericks
NBA
2024.
finalists.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like all these 2024 Mavericks shirts end up in these impoverished places.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the reverse of that.
And I would say that the Southern rebels are kind of like the provisional IRA during the Troubles in Ireland.
Yeah.
They're like a terrorist group that's not really associated with the actual governing body, but there's a little give and take. There's some stuff. There's some quiet handshakes in the dark and things like that. While Surratt is at this place, she makes one friend, Marcus. They have a pet turtle. The turtle lives with them. Feels like animal life is kind of scarce in this world. Like resources have dried up. Like, the world has changed. She meets early on when she's, I think, about 12. She's been living there for 5 or 6 years. This guy, Albert Gaines, who is a well-dressed guy. Oh, and we should mention that the Chestnut family are all black, right? They're African American. Gaines, I don't think his race is ever but I think he's a white guy, right? He has this sort of like, we learn later, he's from the North, and he got involved in the Southern cause, as a lot of people did, because he wanted to have some adventure in his life, right? It seemed like a good thing,
Right, and he's got all this wisdom.
He'd been in the army before. He'd been in Iraq during some earlier war and things like this. And he becomes a kind of mentor to her, kind of molding her into a child soldier, essentially.
That's right.
Right? And he's also...
And that part I think is really effective.
Yeah, and shows...
Where it leads, we'll talk about. But I do really love this idea, because so much of this, right, is flipping the experiences that, people in the part of the world where the author is from have been dealing with.
That's right.
In reality.
Like
And
a
so
CIA guy is just
that's
around,
right.
and he's spreading
That's
this and
right.
that. It's
And
like,
you're
come
displaced
work
living in
for
the
as a
Middle East.
translator for us.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll get you out to America. Like false promises, things like that. Yeah, and basically there are a lot of very direct. Oh, she also meets Joe, and Joe is a
Yeah,
Bouazizi.
Joe matters.
Yeah,
Joe's
he's
great.
he's a Bouazizi agent who's just
Hmm.
kind of floats around in this rebellious South, giving
Just taking
material,
stock.
getting guns to people who
Yeah.
need them, getting this
Yeah, I
to
can help you
that.
out. Oh, what do you need? Yeah.
Oh, you need cigarettes for your troops? Look, this fell off a truck. It's like
Right.
he's another through line throughout the story. Eventually, there's a massacre at the camp,
Mhm.
and this is a very clear parallel to the Sabra and Shatila massacre in 1982, which occurred in a Palestinian encampment in Lebanon, and which was sort of instigated by the IDF with U.S. support, presumably, and
Shocked to learn.
carried out by Lebanese Christians, right? So there's like a plausible deniability. This is very
Yeah.
like, and a lot of I think a couple thousand people were just gunned down,
Jesus.
who were people who'd been displaced or were the descendants of people displaced from the earlier Nakba, etc. And this is kind of what happens here, where people just storm into the camp and murder as many people as they can. During this conflict, Sarat, who's 12, has a knife that Gaines gave to her, and she successfully stabs and kills one of these raiding soldiers,
Hmm.
um, which is kind of like the
It's the coming of age
it's like
moment.
the through the looking glass. Like
Yeah.
there's no going back after
She
this.
fights now. Yeah,
Yeah,
she fights.
she's
She's in the fight.
she is a fully a child soldier, right? And
Yeah.
during the massacre, her mother is killed. Her brother, who was a rebel soldier himself, is a little bit older, was in a firing line and was shot in the head, but survived. And he's
Hmm.
considered kind of a miracle. Like he's the
Yeah.
one Southern boy who survived getting shot in the head during this massacre. At that point, we jumped the narrative forward 5 years. One thing we both liked about the book is that there's 15 chapters. Between each of the chapters, there's some kind of historical document that's presented
Yeah.
that helps to flesh out the picture of the world, give you more details on how things came to
And
be.
some of them are like it's very engaging. Some of them are like news story-ish
Yeah, yeah.
pieces that explain
Some
like
are transcripts.
someone getting killed or how the Civil War started. These little pieces.
Right. Some are transcripts from way in the future of congressional testimony about a committee
Yeah,
that's
it's very cool.
trying to get to the bottom of this after all this time.
And I think that like although there are some things I don't love about the story, what I think it's a really good amount of it.
Yeah.
It's never heavy-handed and it's never gets you bogged down. You're excited to get to the end of every chapter because there's going to be like a cool little, news update.
Little break, yeah, that'll
Yeah.
fill in some more of the story. They eventually, after this massacre, are resettled in Georgia. They have their own house. It seems pretty nice, all things considered. They even have a maid to take care of Simon, the brother, who's not fully
Right. So they are awarded, I believe,
money.
money and housing as a result of the massacre
That's right.
by the South,
Yeah.
by the Reds. Yeah.
And presumably this is backed with Bouazizi funds or whatever.
Isn't it
But
all?
the maid is Karina, who's of Bangladeshi origin, but has lived in America for most of her life. Her parents, in fact, live in the north. She's a nurse. She takes care
Mhm.
of Simon, who's not a full invalid, but he's struggling to recover. Even after 5 years, he's becoming more cognizant. He's
Yeah,
turning.
getting shot in the brain will do that.
Yeah, it's
I
not
think.
good, right? It's
Yeah.
not ideal. And we see some other like little glimpses of life in the South. There's this scene where there's this brutal MMA style like free for all brawl.
Yeah.
That felt like a little bit of a callback to Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. You ever read Invisible Man?
No.
One of the great novels. It opens with this. It's about the plight of African American men, particularly, but people more generally in the South. And the opening scene is this young black man is recruited into this boxing, like kind of underground boxing match where a bunch of rich Southern grandees, and this is in the 1930s.
Oh, they're all like
30s.
betting on him and
Yeah,
stuff?
exactly. And so it has the same, a little bit of that same energy, I think. Um,
No, I think that like crazy MMA fighting would absolutely become the like spectacle, the national sport,
well, in
of
an
this
era
type
when
of.
you're in a violent struggle against your
Yeah,
neighbors, like
right.
you're
It's not
just
enough to go watch like The Sweet Science?
no, and you can't, a 3 point shot just isn't as exciting as it
Yeah,
once
yeah, right,
was,
right.
So we've got uh,
But in this moment, she Surratt is,
it's working as a rebel, like
yeah, she's fully in. She wants revenge,
yeah,
right?
for what happened to her mother, for what happened to her brother. So she goes out on scouting missions and in the border region close to Tennessee. And on one of these, she succeeds in, and this is, I think, where we both start to have some issues with the book. She succeeds in assassinating uh, one of the Union's chief generals, Joseph Weiland, right? Who's
Hmm.
like
This one
Scott
actually
Weiland's
didn't
great grandson or something. I don't remember.
because because I didn't realize what was coming. I was actually still in at that point. I was
Yeah,
like,
no, I
okay,
think
this
it's
is this is the big moment of the book that will define her,
yeah,
right? This was her big act.
and it's a big deal because, like we were talking about last week, political assassinations never quite work out the way you want to. Rather than
The unintended consequences,
exactly, rather than
right?
this
Yeah,
leading to the North like backing off, no, in fact they like triple down,
yeah.
and so there's a huge troop surge, if you will,
Hmm.
and
Where have we heard that before?
yeah, the parallels with there's no you know analogy being developed here at all.
Yeah,
We eventually meet the leader of the rebels, who's this guy Bragg, who's like encouraging her and her whole family to like relocate, like
yeah.
based
No
like
shit.
like we know you
You
did
just
this, and
you're
like
lucky you've gotten this far.
like where's your sister? I told you to bring her too, and like
Yeah,
she's like no,
yeah.
she's not involved in this. Very shortly thereafter, the sister is killed in a drone strike.
Hmm.
But the thing about the drones in this are funny. It's like there are these drones that are flying around that are armed, but the North has lost the ability to control them. So they just
Yeah.
kind of fire at random. I think it's a little bit more realistic vision of the kind of Terminator 2 machines gone.
Yeah, I also like that, because it's one of the interesting things to know about the book in general is that it doesn't mimic like a near future sci-fi. So you aren't inundated because it's refugee camps and
Right.
relatively like impoverished areas. You're dealing more with scarcity and trying to find resources. You're not in the like Black Mirror of it all, and I love that about this
No one's
book.
like going into VR machines or
Right.
anything
And
like
then the
that.
fact that like kind of the only like techie world build is that these sophisticated drones don't really work.
And they just
And
kill they just
kind of
kill
kill
random
random
people or
people.
blow up
And this
random
again,
towns.
speaking of plausible, that feels like it could easily end up going down
It's
that
like one of
way.
those videos of like a AI driven car trying to turn around and like it just going
Right, right.
like um so her sister, who's her twin, is dead, and this is just another blow, and this is another step in her complete indoctrination and
Right.
shift towards indifference.
If the high profile assassination wasn't enough,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Then she's very quickly picked up and taken to a prison in the Caribbean on an island
Weird. Where have we heard of
where
that
she's
before?
waterboarded. Is there any?
Interesting. I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, it's it's Sugarloaf Mountain, and it's been turned into a Guantanamo style prison.
Yeah.
Obviously, she's never told why she's been arrested.
Hmm.
She confesses to all sorts of things she didn't actually do.
Right.
And it turns out eventually that Gaines, her mentor, flipped and gave her up, right?
Yeah.
And
Well, I just briefly want to say, like this section, this part, in a way the most interesting part to me because it showed the very interesting way that he wrote sympathetic characters and sort of like where the sympathies were placed. So first, it's like these characters are in the South, right? So it is kind of counter to the general idea that the Union, were the good guys in the first Civil War. Um, and this time it kind of like plays on when you take her to this sort of a Guantanamo-esque facility,
Yeah.
right? It's these people now being lifted into the type of scenario that they obviously had like grown up being complete complicit in and not doing enough to, finding no way to stop it. And now they're in that situation. And I just find it interesting. It's not there's really nothing about the North in this book to
Right.
speak of, right? And so it's but it doesn't feel one-sided in that sense. And
No.
but I think by taking us through her childhood, it does a really good job of depoliticizing without being
Or
apolitical.
without
So it's
being
not like
and it's not like just an apology for
right, and
for
it's not like
anyone. It's just like a
right, and it's not the Alex Garland, right? It's not it still has a story. It explains what's
there
going
is
on.
a
It explains
reason behind the
there
Civil
is a
War.
reason that these things happen, but um and that's why I think we both agree, like the first half of the book, it's like this slow roll was so good.
Yeah.
um, as she went down this path. But even all those rights that are so tenuous, right? So then see them flipped on Americans like this, I thought was really really effective in this part.
Absolutely. And after 7 years at this facility, she's released because the union has come to think that Gaines is just not trustworthy and that
Yeah,
she's a nobody. They had the wrong person the whole time. Ironically, they never even ask her if she's the one who assassinated the general, the one thing that she did actually do, right?
yeah,
And she's just kind of dropped off back with her family. She gets out of a
yeah.
van, and her brother is married. He's married to his maid, Karina. He's gotten a
Mhm.
lot better. He still has his bad days, but he's able to function pretty well. He can talk, he
Yeah,
can move around, and they have a son. And we learn, the novel starts with a little brief intro from this son, who is the person who has compiled the novel within the sort of in-world thing that we're right. And
yeah,
he ends up doing it from diaries that Surratt leaves to him rather indirectly. But
sure.
setting that aside, the last part of the novel is primarily from his perspective, the son's perspective, which apparently is a big thing with Omar El Akkad.
Oh, really?
His novel after this won the Giller Prize.
It's the big Canadian
Yeah, exactly.
fiction award.
Exactly. And it was called What Strange Paradise, and it's about a refugee escaping from war-torn Syria who's a child, and it's told from the child's
I will
perspective.
100% read that book.
Yeah,
This book was definitely good enough to warrant dipping back into this guy's work.
I would agree. I think that I'm not crazy about novels written by adults where the kid is the main character. like,
No, really? I love it. I love it.
It's not always for me. It feels a little tendentious at times, but never mind. I think he handles it really well in this book. We
Right. So
get
now we're up to this point. Let's start to explain where we both sort of think it starts
so
to.
it turns out that her rebel friends are like, "Hey, we didn't think you'd survive, but here you are. By the way, we caught the guard that was torturing you in Guantanamo. Do you want to
Right. Oh,
like?"
but she also gets out she gives everybody up, even people that she doesn't
Yeah.
know.
Well, she just
Right?
tells them whatever they want to hear.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's fine because they end up not
yeah.
believing anything that she says, even the things that were true, right?
That's right.
Which I think is again a sort of tacit thing about the nature of torture. Like torture doesn't work. Torture is a
Yeah.
stupid strategy for getting information, obviously, because people will say whatever you want them to say
Mhm.
if you're torturing them. She ends up killing this guard, and in this like very brutal way, he's like tied up by the rebels, and then she's going to kill the rest of his family, but she sort of recognizes that his sons are twins. Since she was a twin, she has this weird
Right.
twin nostalgia. So she ends up sparing them, which will be very convenient shortly thereafter,
Mhm.
right? She runs into her old friend Marcus that she had the pet turtle with. He's been a Union soldier this whole time because he escaped to the north before the massacre, and they're still tight. She doesn't bear
She
him.
doesn't kill him.
She doesn't bear him any grudges for work. Well,
Yeah.
she may have killed him 5. But she even tries to warn him. She's like, "Get out of here! Like something really
Yeah.
bad's gonna happen soon." Um, she doesn't like her her husband's wife. Also, she's 6'5". She's a giant woman. That's another
Yes.
thing that's like a little like.
I like it.
I mean, it's just
Why not?
it's just an odd choice, right? She's
Well, it's like who's 6'5"? Like Brittany Griner?
yeah. How many
Probably
women in the
6'5"?
world do you think there are that are 6'5"? Like 1,200, maybe
Yeah.
in the whole world.
Well, although people get taller as time goes on?
Not necessarily. That's just because of nutrition. I don't think they grow to like gigantic proportions. I think 6'5" is
Like in 2200, there aren't going to be like a
seven.
bunch of
Everyone's
8'4"
gonna.
small forwards.
I don't think so. I think
Okay.
physics is against that. I think when you get that
Sure.
height, you start having a lot of health problems. In any case, a lot of convenient things happen at the end, right? She gets a chance to meet her mentor, who's a shell of a man. He's living in an old cabin. He gave everyone up.
Chaotic era of displacement and tragedy, but always running into all of her friends.
Yeah,
Right.
and the war is ending. This is now 20 years after the start. This is 2095. She spent 7 years in prison. She spent X years at the refugee camp. She spent X years in Georgia. And there's going to be this big reunification ceremony where everyone's going to celebrate. Hooray. But then she meets with her old friend Joe. Joe finds her. He says, "Hey, you want to do like one last revenge mission for me?" She's like, "Do I ever?" Right? And it
One
involves
last job.
it involves that sickness that we talked about at the top, right? The quick.
Called the Quick.
Right. And she kidnaps her nephew, Benjamin, who she's come to like, and just ships him off to Alaska. Doesn't tell the parents anything, doesn't tell them to get out or to try to save them in any way. Just wakes up early one morning, grabs the kid, takes him off. He's off to Alaska. He survives. Then she goes to the border to cross into the Union territory. Everyone's on high alert because of this upcoming ceremony. And the guards at the border crossing that she comes to are the kids she spared.
Oh, that's very strange.
And they,
What
for
are the
some
chances?
reason, let her through, even though they know she killed their father, right?
Right.
It's very odd, wouldn't you say? Like,
Well, I mean, I think that if I was to give some slack, right? Because it at some points it's like a hyper realist political story of the devolution of a nation and the reversal of empire and all that. But I think by using the kid and the life journey, I think it allows a bit of some of like a folk story kind of parable vibe.
so she's almost like a new Paul Bunyan or something. She's like this one woman that did all these things that.
Right.
But we're supposed to believe
it didn't work for me, but I think like that was probably the thinking. If I had to guess.
So, long story short, she unleashes a plague in Columbus at the reunification ceremony, which kills 110 million people over the next 10
That's it?
over the next 10 years.
Also, love the number so much. When I first saw it, I laughed out loud. Like it's the perfect. Oh my god, it's so funny to land on it. There's so many fucking people.
Yeah.
But it's not like everybody by any stretch.
But it's like
right? But
it's like
so many people.
Almost a third of our current population.
Yeah, and it's just her just bringing it in.
Yeah.
And then boom.
Her, the one who also, instigated the sort of end game by killing the general whose son is the president at the ceremony. It's like so like just to wrap up, like I think the best part of the novel is like the world building, as we've discussed, right? That there are these that it's a really gritty and well thought out depiction on what America, driven to civil war in 50 years by climate issues, by fossil fuel restrictions, by inequality. I think it's like a really successful depiction of what that might look like. And
like engrossing in a way that like a lot of books that try to give you like an imagined political history it's too much.
Yeah.
It gets too granular. It's just a really good balance when it comes to that
And
section.
I think, Parable of the Sower, I think, is does a similarly successful job of
Yeah,
like just giving you enough details, not like keeping you total, not like it's not you're not totally bogged down by all the detail. Like
right.
it's easy enough to get, but it's also not
But
like
this one I liked better because it fed a little more into like the news junkie political
yeah, yeah,
side.
yeah, yeah.
It's
It's
like
a little
getting
bit
a bit of a better idea. Parable, there's more of a vibe of
of
like
philosophy and like
and like someone like
spirituality.
right, like someone from out of town is telling like gives you news of something. Like it's all very cool, but it's like again
Well,
this like
the author
divulge
has also primarily worked as a reporter prior to turning to novelist.
the author of American War.
Yeah,
Yeah,
El Akkad.
no, it definitely feels like
Yeah,
it.
like so
Yeah,
he's very good on the detail oriented
yeah.
like depiction of events from a seemingly objective perspective, and like I feel that it's a little bit less literary perhaps, although there's literary elements.
Yeah.
It's not a pure genre work either. Um, and I also like the way it focuses on this family, showing how they, in particular, are destroyed by this war
Right.
that they have really
And
nothing
one
to
of the
do with.
few people they're kind of in between, right? The purple
Yeah,
of it
exactly.
all.
They're not blue, they're not red, they're just on the margins and they're drawn in nonetheless and destroyed. And
And
that's
even her, it doesn't feel political. It feels like
it's personal.
personal
Yeah.
revenge. Yeah.
Yeah, her personal killing of 110 million people with a plague, right? Like that maybe it gets a little out of
Right.
hand, but and I think we've already talked like what for me is like less successful is the sort of Forrest Gump like aspect where she just happens to be the agent of
Yes, that's
one
exactly right.
after another of
The
these
Forrest
like
Gump.
catastrophic, right? Like Forrest
Yeah, the
Gump
Forrest Gump of
calling up to be
sci-fi.
like, I think some men are breaking into the Watergate or what, it's just like, all right, like,
Oh my God, I hadn't thought of that. That's
and then
perfect.
she like runs, and there's a lot of coincidences, right? She runs into
Yeah.
the sons of the guy at the border, they let her through. She runs into her old friend Marcus, she can warn him. She
Yeah.
learns about where Gaines is. She can kill him, but she spares him. She gives him back the knife. Like, there's all this sort
Yeah,
of
it's a good thing that like the stuff that she does is not mentioned in any of the news stuff, and you get because
well, no,
it
it's
definitely it
mentioned,
definitely
but it's mentioned that they don't know who did it. It's never.
yes, but what I'm saying is that what it does is it prevents you from feeling as though you're on the Forrest Gump ride long enough to get into the book and be like, this is pretty great.
Right.
And then there's just a couple bang bang moments where you're like, oh,
Okay,
wait,
so she did
oh,
everything.
yeah,
She's
oh,
Luke
so she did
Skywalker. She blew up the
right
Death
because you
Star
start to
and she
learn of
killed
you start
Darth
to learn
Vader.
of the
What?
plague. Yeah, you start to learn of the plague.
Early on in the story, you don't
If you
realize right
if you
away that she's going
it's
to be the
actually
one.
her, this little girl, like a tall girl eventually, but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, that prevents it from being a great book, I think, would be the how I felt
and
reading
I think
it. But
just
it's
one
a
other.
very good book.
It's very good. One other thing I would say is, although a lot of the characters in the story are black, the issue of race doesn't really surface in a way that
Yeah.
it feels a little odd, right? To have a black oriented story set in the South with black protagonists,
Hmm.
and there's a civil war happening, and race just doesn't seem to play any part in this civil war. It's like, well,
Yeah,
that's
I'd be interested to know. I'm sure he's been asked about that. I would be interested to know what
yeah.
he.
I'd like to learn
I
a
mean,
little bit more.
to me, the kind of most interesting part about it, and again, just to sort of finish it up, is there's so much focus on America and the politics of America every goddamn day.
Yeah,
And
especially now.
it's
But yeah,
yes, it's like day to day descent into madness. People yelling that they're going to call for civil war. You got outsiders looking in, being like, "Where does this end?"
yeah,
And one of the things that is rarely sort of given credence is in a severe American breakdown, maybe not quite civil war, but whatever
sure,
it looks like. It's those shifts in the global balance of power, right, that become incredibly fraught, incredibly complicated, and sort of open to all kinds of possibilities, and very plausibly, very soon, will involve climate and ecological and environmental factors on top of it, such that, like, again, not to say this is all what's going to take place, he nailed it, but to me that, you know, the role of China, the role of the Middle East, if America is so beset by its domestic chaos that, let's say Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
That becomes untenable to continue. What happens to the entire fate of NATO? Not to be too blue-pilled, but
Sure.
this book does, I think, an excellent job of capturing that while telling a very interesting personal story.
Yeah, and I think that differentiates it both from Orcs and Craig and Parable, right? Is the sense of
Yeah.
America within a broader context. And maybe
Yeah.
it's helpful that it was written by a Canadian. I know obviously Margaret Atwood is also Canadian, but her focus
Right.
is a
And I
little
think
bit
I think
differently.
even many informed people in this country just almost can't
They can't
think outside
they
of an
can't see
American
that.
context.
Yeah.
You know? And I think this does a good job of being, oh yeah, there is a way in which the next 50 years do not just play out with every 4 years having an election that's the most important in our lifetime,
Yeah.
and we cling to slightly diminished but still superpower
Right.
vibe role all the way through the end of our lives or our kids' lives,
Yeah.
there are these other players, there's other actors, and you know, it's even happening right now on obviously a smaller scale than this book, but these things, it has an impact that the guy running the White House right now can't finish a sentence, and the other one is a convicted felon whose fans and supporters and delegates are holding up literal mass deportation now signs.
Yeah.
You know,
No, it's not good. But yeah, I would say
once again, that's the line of the episode.
That's my go-to
It's not
line.
good.
It's not good, Bob.
Yeah.
I think it's a good book. I enjoyed it. I'm glad we talked about it, and I would recommend it to anyone who has a taste for this kind of apocalyptic literature. Next week, we will be talking about a different type of apocalyptic work, a film, one of the best ever made, one of the best films to ever.
Arguably inspired the pod. In fact, or was one of the first things we discussed when we talked about trying this out.
And one of Mark Fisher, the late Mark Fisher's favorite movies, Children of Men.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't wait.
And maybe we'll bring some of Fisher's stuff in.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to. I'll look over his notes on it. And looking forward to that. Now, if you'd like to subscribe to the pod, we would like that very much. If you'd like to,
if
you'd like to like it, give us a review,
a rating, a review.
Follow
Follow
us on Instagram. Yeah. The End of the World WMS. Follow us on YouTube if you want. All the pod apps go up there. Sometimes
we're sort of popping off on YouTube. So
we're blowing up on YouTube.
We're blowing up.
We're getting tens of views. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I look forward to talking about Children of Men. And until then, this has been The End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and we will talk to you real soon.